Okay, I think we're live. How's everybody doing out there? Getting ready for Valentine's Day this weekend. This will be a fun one today. Let's see here. Just going to wait for some more people to show up here. Let's see. Let's make sure that the sound, okay, can everybody hear me okay? Hello from Ireland. Wow. What time is it in Ireland? From Canada, from the UK? Great. Okay, let's go ahead and we'll get started here. I hope everybody's doing well. It's, what is it, February 8th or 9th? Gosh, I'm losing track. I've been working on a lot of different videos. Oh, man, we got some good stuff planned coming up in the next few days. Very excited to give you a little sneak preview. We've got never done anything on Tom Petty. We've got something with Tom Petty coming. Got a little bit more Van Halen. Never get enough Van Halen. And got a lot of interviews coming up, great interviews. And we'll let you know about that. Maybe there's some questions that you want me to ask. And actually, if you go on Patreon, you can, I always share with our Patreon users what interviews are coming up, and they can make requests for questions. But we've had some really fun polls the last few weeks, and great discussion in those polls. And so, thank you. Is that Danny Thompson? Thank you very much. Glad to catch the live stream from Minnesota, coming from Minnesota. So I'll try to get to comments, and let's have a little debate. Let's go back and forth about the greatest rock and male vocalists of all time. And hit me up on comments, on Super Chat, and we'll go back and forth and give you some shout outs there, and we'll talk about this. But I really enjoyed the polls that we've had and the discussion in those comments. The last two polls have been a lot of fun. Greatest rock male vocalist, and then the greatest year for an artist and year in history. So let's get into it. Let's start with greatest male rock vocalist. Man, I sat down today about an hour before this live stream, and just off the top of my head, I started just writing down all of the male vocalists, rock male vocalists, because if we just open it up for male vocalists, man, I mean, you could go. I mean, Frank Sinatra is one of my favorite singers of all time. He's not a rock vocalist, so. But I just kind of wrote down. There's usually 4 or 5 always in the discussion, and that's why when I do these polls, they have 5. They have 5 choices for you. That's all YouTube gives you. Believe me, I wish I could throw out 15 or 20 choices, because every time I hit the button to push the poll out, I'm always like, I wish I would have put Ronnie James Dio. I wish I would have put, Ronnie Van Zant. I wish I would have put Rod Stewart. I wish I would have put, and I go back and forth. And Brad Delp, and but it's subjective, of course, but there's always the same 4 or 5 names, right? There's always going to be Robert Plant. Robert Plant is always up there. Freddie Mercury. I think those are the 2 that are anytime you see greatest rock male vocalists, you're always going to see those 2. And then I think I've always felt like, growing up, I always felt like Steve Perry never got the love that he deserved, and now he is. That's what's great, is it seems like the last few, I don't know if it's the last few years, people finally started recognizing the voice himself, Steve Perry. And so that's always given me a lot of joy, because Steve Perry's always been one of my favorite singers ever. And so that's great. And then, of course, there's Bon Scott. There's the argument for Roger Daltrey. There's a lot of others. Elvis. So why don't we go decade by decade? Paul Rogers. Paul Rogers, another phenomenal singer. incredible, sensational. So let's go in and talk about this. So I like to go, I started jogging my memory by going decade by decade. You know, in the 1950s, Elvis Presley. Before Elvis, there was nothing. And I would put Elvis, thank you, Jeff Roybal. I hope I said your last name right, Jeff. I would say that Elvis Presley is all time for me. Just incredible. And Roy Orbison, the great Roy Orbison. Now, he's not really a rock voice per se. I mean, it was rock and roll back in the 50s, considered rock and roll. That's always a debate that we have on here when people say, a lot of people will kind of take the term rock and roll and have it mean heavy metal. And rock and roll, of course, when it was is a term for sex and used to describe the music that was coming out with Elvis Presley and the Everly Brothers and Little Richard and Chuck Berry and so on and so forth. But anyway, I don't want to get off on a tangent here. So Elvis Presley, Roy Orbison, Little Richard. Little Richard was the first. I mean, obviously Sly Stone and Prince followed in his in his direction. Buddy Holly, of course, great vocalist as well. Then you get into the 60s and Lennon and McCartney, undeniable there. Lennon, McCartney. I know I got some people saying Sam Cooke, and I totally agree. But the problem is that's more R&B, and it's so hard because we could talk about hundreds of names here. And so that's why we've got to focus it in on, I think, rock vocalists, you know. And so let's see, best male rock singers, top 100 countdown, legendary vocalist, John Legend, Roger Daltrey, Robert Plant, Mick Jagger, Freddie Mercury is what one of our people just said. And anyway, going into the 60s, you've got Lennon and McCartney. I mean, they were the measuring stick, and everybody followed suit. I love Brian Wilson. I know the Beach Boys aren't really considered rock, hard rock, but for rock and roll, good old-fashioned rock and roll, Brian Wilson, his falsetto, just incredible voice. Of course, Roger Daltrey, Ray Davies, the great Ray Davies, can't leave him out of the conversation. Jimi Hendrix, Mick Jagger. Then you get into the discussion about like frontmen versus vocalists, and that's what this discussion is really just about. Rock vocalists, not about frontman, because if you were talking frontman, you'd have to balance that out, and then you'd be talking about like Jim Morrison and obviously David Lee Roth and so on and so forth. But I think just rock and roll vocalists. So then we get into the I jotted some of these down. The 70s, of course, Robert Plant, Elton John, incredible voice, Freddie Mercury, Brad Delp, Geddy Lee, John Anderson, Ronnie Van Zant, Rod Stewart, an incredible voice before he started singing show tunes. David Bowie, of course. Steven Tyler. Steven Tyler would definitely be in my top 10 all time. Then you start getting into, I mean, Paul Rodgers would definitely be in my top 10. And then you get into the 80s, Steve Perry, Ronnie James Dio, Joe Elliott from Def Leppard, Axl Rose. And a lot of people dog on Axl Rose. The guy's got 6 octaves at his peak. And he could sing low, go all the way up. And then you've got one of my favorites, Phil Collins. We just had, was it Silas Riesma, who said, I hope I said your name right, Kevin Cronin, John Fogerty, Jeff Lynne for the 70s. Yeah, I agree with those. Then you get into Bruce Dickinson, you get into metal, and then punk, Joe Strummer, and then, of course, Prince and Michael Jackson. Michael Hutchins, I think, had such a great voice. It was a charismatic voice, you know, and he had such a presence on stage. Again, talking about frontman. Bono had a great voice, has a great voice. I always thought Phil Collins had a phenomenal voice. And I know he started to push a little bit more to the pop side in the 80s and the mid-80s into the 90s. But he had an incredible voice. Then you get into the 90s, and Lane Staley is top 20 for me. Lane Staley, Alice in Chains, Chris Cornell. Are you kidding me? The more time that goes by, the more I think people appreciate how incredible Chris Cornell is. James Hetfield, And then others, you know, there's Peter Gabriel, there's Sting, there's Jim Morrison, Tom Petty, Bruce Springsteen, Billy Joel. Billy Joel's one of my favorites. David Coverdale, Bobby Kimball. I know we're just kind of going through a list here. Jimmy Jameson, Sammy Hagar, Ozzy Osbourne, Ian Gillan, Sebastian Bach. I mean, if you're talking about one song wonders here, I mean, his vocal on I Remember You is just earth-shattering. And then, of course, you have, talking about one song, Brad Delp. You think about Brad Delp on More Than a Feeling. Has anybody ever attempted that song karaoke? I can sing. I can sing okay. And I was just singing that a couple of weeks ago. We had a little karaoke thing at my house here, and my kids wanted to sing, and my kids love Boston. I think I shared in the video that when I shared it with my son who has autism, he said in the car, I just saw I looked in the rearview mirror, and as I started playing More Than a Feeling, it was getting into it. All of a sudden, I saw his face just light up like, what is this? You know, and it just gave me such joy. I was a proud father at that moment, but he just said, Dad, this is way better than Imagine Dragons. You know, all these kids listen to Imagine Dragons and these newer bands. They just have no idea how incredible, and they did it without auto-tune, without the studio trickery. And so that was great. But we were singing this on karaoke, and he was singing along with me, and I was trying to hit those high notes, and I just had to tap out. Man, you cannot, I mean, to sustain that high note that he hits at the end there, as long as he did, just incredible. I saw somebody just bring up Mickey Thomas, and I would say, totally agree. Mickey Thomas is maybe the most underappreciated rock vocalist of his era. He just, and I think it's because, you know, he was in Jefferson Starship really, and it was kind of pop, and We Built This City and Sarah, and great, I mean, good songs, you know, good pop songs, but I think that he got a little bit snubbed by the critics, and I don't think that people fully appreciated how incredible Mickey Thomas is. I mean, he could well, and he could go toe to toe with anybody at that time. And a little known fact, he was actually chosen to sing Danger Zone before Kenny Loggins, and he turned that down. But anyway, as we go on, of course, Roger Waters, David Gilmour, you gotta talk about that. John Fogerty, Rob Halford. Then you get into the alternative side of things, and you're talking about Robert Smith, who's just got just an incredible, unique, just an amazing voice to me. Morrissey, Michael Stipe. When you get into Morrissey and Michael Stipe, some people, they don't like that voice. They don't like the resonance of that voice. I love Andy Bell of Erasure. Of course, you get into Brian Johnson, AC/DC. And then you get into the more pop rock stuff with Michael McDonald. I mean, Michael McDonald's got one of the greatest voices ever, and George Michael and Kenny Loggins and Daryl Hall, one of my personal favorites. But again, rock vocalist. So we got to narrow it down here, because we could go on and on and on and talk about all these different incredible voices that we have. But if we zero in on 5 or 6, I think that Eric Burdon, somebody just said Eric Burdon. I totally agree. Everybody talks about how incredible Mick Jagger is, and I think it's because he's such a great front man, such a spectacular front man. Eric Burdon, though, for my money, I think if I'm going just voice, I'd take Eric Burdon. I mean, that bluesy voice is just, it's otherworldly, really. So getting into this, I think if we just take the frontman status out, we're not looking for a frontman. I'm just talking about pure rock vocalist. I think that your top 5 or 6 that you have here, and there's 2 lists for me, and I don't know if you're the same. You'll have to tell me. For me, it's who I consider to be the greatest rock vocalist, and then who are my favorite rock vocalists. I think there's 2. It's that way with like albums and songs for me too, because and movies, you know, it's like you listen to an album, and if you were to ask me, what do you think the top 5 albums of all time are? I could tell you right off the top of my head, and they haven't really changed over the last 20, 30 years for me. These were albums that soothed my soul. They shook my world. They stopped my heart, that kind of thing. But they're not albums that I would necessarily listen to all the time. In fact, I might only listen to them once or twice a year, if that. Pet Sounds, Beach Boys, for example. I love Pet Sounds. My favorite album of all time. It's probably like a 3 or 4 way tie. I'm one of those guys that has, like, my wife says it all the time. I'd say I say to the boys, top 5 song of all time. And my wife always says, honey, you have like 400 songs in your top 5. And, you know, it's true. And my kids say that too. Now they've caught on and they say the same thing. They say, Dad, you have like 50 songs in your top 5. And, you know, guilty as charged. But my point is, there are albums that I consider like films. The Godfather 1 and 2 are my favorite movies of all time. I would put Shawshank Redemption, Citizen Kane in there. But these are not movies these are only movies I watch it once every 5 years, because it's just not, they're not movies that lift me up and get me excited to go out and take on the world. But then you have a movie like Grosse Pointe Blank. I can watch that thing. I've probably seen it 100 times. And we all grew up with movies like that we saw all the time, Back to the Future and Raiders of the Lost Ark, where I can quote every like Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Same thing with music for me. There are songs that I can listen to over and over and over again, never get tired of them, and they lift me and they get me excited, and I just love it. Like Something About You, Level 42 is a song like that for me. I listen to it all the time. I never get tired of it. And there's quite a few songs like that. But then there's these epic songs like Scenes from an Italian Restaurant by Billy Joel, or Born to Run, Bruce Springsteen, or you know, epic like Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. I love that album, but I can't listen to it all the time. I probably listen to it once a year, and so singers are like that for me as well. There are singers that I consider to be the greatest of all time, but I don't necessarily listen to them every day. And then there are the singers that I just love their voice, and I find myself listening to them all the time. And you probably have a list like that, and I'd love to hear those lists on here. Who are your top 3 vocalists that you consider to be the 3 greatest? And then who are your 3 favorite voices to hear? So if I were to say that my favorite of all time that I just listen to and I just love their voice, I'd never get tired of it, and I can just listen infinitely. It's the same singer for me on both lists, actually, who I consider to be the greatest singer of all time, and who my favorite is. And that is, drum roll please, Steve Perry, Journey. Steve Perry. I don't know. Maybe it's because there is something about his voice that it's so pure. He just has so much power and so much range and so much emotion all in one. Such great dynamics, like a song like Mother Father or a song like Faithfully. He's got so much in his arsenal. I just love it, and I can listen to it forever and ever. So that would be my pick on both sides. Okay, so first, my list of who I would consider to be the greatest of all time. I would say Steve Perry. I would say Freddie Mercury would be my number 2, a close number 2. Now, if you were to a front man and vocals, I would actually take Freddie Mercury over Steve Perry, because I do believe that Freddie Mercury was a better front man. He just was so electric, beyond the voice. And so I would say that. I would put Robert Plant a close number 3. I would say he's just barely, for me, who I consider to be the greatest. And then as we go on, I have a special place in my heart. I believe that Lennon and McCartney, you have to put those guys in the top 5 greatest rock vocals of all time, because they were the first. They're the ones that influenced everything. And again, this is without frontman status. This is just the vocal. And then I would say that, Ronnie James Dio is up there. I think Joe Cocker is incredible. I would consider him one of the greatest voices of all time. And I'd say Brad Delp. I'd say that Brad Delp at his peak could compete with anybody. Okay, so here are my top 5, just my favorite, my own personal favorite, and I want to hear yours as well. I would go, again, it doesn't change, Steve Perry. My number 2 would be Peter Gabriel. I think Peter Gabriel is astonishing. He's just mesmerizing. And, some people would say, well, is he a rock vocalist? I mean, Genesis, his solo career. I kind of get frustrated by how people genreify things, and they do it like 20 years later. Like, I know that we've talked about this before, where they rename a genre like 20 years later. I think we get caught up in genres. I mean, if we were just to go straight up the greatest singer of all time, regardless of genre, I would put Ray Charles as Stevie Wonder, and Marvin Gaye would definitely be in my top 5. So anyway, not to get off on a tangent here, but Billy Joel's one of my favorite voices ever. I just love the way that he approaches a song. I think Brian Wilson's one of my favorites of all time. Lennon and McCartney. Daryl Hall. For my money, it doesn't get much better than Daryl Hall. Bob Seger. I love Bob Seger's voice. He just got such a with his voice. I love it. A song like Main Street. So much emotion there. And I love Joe Cocker's voice too. May he rest in peace. I think Joe Cocker was just mind-bogglingly good. I know that's not a word, but anyway, I like Springsteen's voice too. He had a great ad in the Super Bowl, by the way. I love that ad. I've just always been a Springsteen guy, and people will say, what about his politics and all that? I don't get mixed up in any of that. I listen for how the music makes me feel. And I'll tell you what, Born to Run, if there was a song that made me feel like I was busting out of prison, like I could take on the world, that was the song for me when I first heard that. Freddie Mercury is one of my favorite voices ever. I got to give it up to Phil Collins and George Michael too. I think George Michael was so underappreciated. I mean, he kind of took over when Freddie Mercury passed. I mean, you go back and you listen to Somebody to Love, his version of it, and he was definitely standing tall that day. So anyway, those are my picks, some of my favorites, and Brad Delp also a favorite. I just always have enjoyed his just the way that he attacks a song, and More Than a Feeling. I mean, that vocals only. You go on YouTube and you look at that, and you're just in heaven. At least I am. I just cannot believe that the human voice got to the levels that Brad Delp got to, and it's just such a sad story. Brad Delp deserves so much more credit than he gets, and I'm sure I've left some great vocalists out. I mean, Tom Johnston of Doobie Brothers, he's incredible, and so many more. And I mean, if we didn't talk about genre here, and we were just talking about the greatest voices ever, my favorite voice ever, Frank Sinatra. I know people will think that's crazy, but to me, Frank Sinatra, there's that cool factor there too, where he's just so laid back, the way he sings or croons or hits a note, and he just so much emotion. You can literally feel the Jack Daniels. You can taste the Jack Daniels, the hundreds of hours of anguish and pain that Frank Sinatra has gone through in the way that he approaches a song. And I'll tell you what, I know that a lot of the voices that you listen to, that you think are phenomenal, and I do too, even Ronnie James Dio and Bruce Dickinson, people like that, they love Frank Sinatra. They listen to Frank Sinatra. They study his technique. I mean, his breathing technique, he got that from watching Tommy James play his instrument. So anyway, let's move on. I know we're, let's see, where are we at? We're at 24 minutes, so I know we've got about 10 minutes here. I want to talk about the other poll that I think is great, and I want to hear some of your comments. Tell me who your favorite rock male vocalist is, and then who you consider to be the greatest. For me, they're one and the same again, Steve Perry. So let's move in to Artist Year. I said that, we posted a video about Prince a few days back about the incredible bombastic phenomenon that Purple Rain was and is still. And I said, what do you think the greatest year, biggest year, artist/year was in the history of music and culture? And sometimes I try to be as descriptive as I can when I'm doing these polls, but sometimes people maybe don't read the fine print and they assume something. But what I mean is, when an artist released an album or a set of songs where it lit the world on fire for at least a year or longer, where it changed everything, it changed the culture, it changed history, it changed everything after, from a culture standpoint, everybody in the world, that it blew everybody's mind to the point where they were the biggest artists, their songs, their albums were everywhere, and nobody could stop it. Thank you, Junkyard Dave. I just got love your channel. Thank you very much. So I talked about a couple of things that and again, I didn't live through the 60s. I wish I had. I obviously interviewed a lot of people from the 60s and gained their impressions from being there, actually being there and getting that history. So I've done the best I can there. I didn't live through the 70s. I was born in the 70s. So again, the same thing. But to me, I lived two of these moments in Michael Jackson. Well, three of these moments that I listed as the 5 choices. But Prince in 84, Purple Rain, Michael Jackson, Thriller in late 82, really 1983, and then Nirvana in late 91 into 92. I lived through these times. We've had a couple of moments like that since the rock era. That's why I kind of focused on the rock era. You had, obviously, Adele had one of those moments where she was massive and sold, over 20 million copies of an album, was at #1 for a long time, and everybody was buying the album, even the physical copy of the album. That was a phenomenon. I think you had a little bit of that with Garth Brooks, the way he put country on the map after that. I think Eminem had a little bit of that. But I still don't think those 3 compared to the 5 that I listed. Bob Law, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And so let's talk about those 5 that I did, because I feel like Pink Floyd and Eagles and Van Halen and Zeppelin, and of course Elton John, the Bee Gees, Whitney Houston, Garth Brooks, I think those were the honorable mentions. They certainly had impact. I mean, Pink Floyd probably the most. That would have probably been my other moment if they would have given me 6 choices, because I probably would have put when Dark Side of the Moon came out. I mean, there was all these rumors, right, that there was a factory that only made Dark Side of the Moon for like years, and I believe that. I think actually Dark Side of the Moon has sold more copies than it's given credit for. That's a video for another day. I could talk about that forever. Like, right now, Eagles' Greatest Hits is the biggest selling album in America. And this is going to be a controversial thing for me to say. And I've done a lot of research on this. I don't believe that it's the biggest selling album in American history. I don't. The charts and the sales charts of RIAA and all these kind of things that you can go do the research yourself. And I'll do a video on this one day because I think it's important. Everything that I have looked at, there's no way. And that's another person I forgot. Don Henley has got a phenomenal voice. He would definitely be one of the ones. But anyway, I don't know that I think it's definitely top 3, but I don't think it's the biggest. Anyway, we'll talk about that down the road. But let's get into it. Focus on these 5. Elvis in 56, Beatles in 1964, Michael Jackson in 1983, Prince in 1984, Denise Denton, thank you very much, and Nirvana. Okay, so the way the poll went is the way I thought the poll would go. I thought that the Beatles would obviously be #1. Actually, they hit 50%. Usually in these polls that we do in our community, you don't see people hitting 50% very often. And so that was no surprise. And then Elvis being second, Michael Jackson being third, obviously hurt by what's happened in over the last 10 years. Michael Jackson, just focusing on the music though, I figured that he would finish #3, and Nirvana was number 4 and Prince was number 5. So really it comes down to 3 that are in their own category. There's Elvis, the Beatles, and Michael Jackson. So I'll put it this way. If I had to decide, Miguel Morales, thank you very much. Very, very kind of you. Lane Staley is the best in my opinion. Yeah, Lane Staley, incredible. Okay, so back to it. So why I put Prince in there, because I think Prince did something that was ultra incredible, just sensational. Michael Jackson Thriller, for those who lived it know, in 1983, nobody touched Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson did something that probably, again, only the Beatles and Elvis had ever done before. Maybe Frank Sinatra back in the Bobby Soxer times, but it wasn't a very big world back then, so it's hard to judge. But really, Michael Jackson, the phenom that Thriller was, I don't even think the Beatles and Elvis had touched. I mean, the thing sold 110 million copies globally. The next closest album below that hasn't even sold half that amount. Thriller was such a beast. It was so big. It was everybody had a copy of Thriller. I mean, I've had 4 or 5 copies of it on cassette, on vinyl, on CD, digitally, and rebuying it when it did the 25th anniversary and all that kind of stuff. And I know I'm not, I know a lot of you are the same. Everybody had Michael Jackson Thriller. It's just one of those albums. So the reason why I thought that was what Prince did was so massive is he lost the Grammy Awards in '83. This is actually out of a book that I read, where he lost in the categories that he was nominated for. This was back when the Grammys were a big deal. And he, I don't know, I think that Prince was very competitive, especially right then. And he felt like, man, I'm just as good as these guys. Just as good as these guys. I can compete with anybody. He wanted to destroy the world. It was Prince versus the world. And this is why I have so much respect and why I included him in the poll, is because he came out when Thriller was still dominating. This was early 1984. You think about it, Michael Jackson Thriller was still at number 1. It had been out for well over a year. All of 83, part of 82, the last part of 82, and then into 84, it was still just breaking records. I mean, you had the making of Michael Jackson Thriller come out on video cassette. You had all the music videos playing, Michael Jackson Fever, the Pepsi commercials, everything that was going on. Prince comes out and says, hold on, Michael, hold my beer, right? And he releases a movie that was even supposed to do that well, right? Anybody involved in Purple Rain thought that it was going to be a fringe movie, like an indie movie. I've even read some places where people didn't know for sure if it would even get a theater release. I don't know if that's true or not. There's a lot of urban legends. But the fact that Prince comes out, and after losing that Grammy, he lost those Grammy Awards in like February of '83. By the summer, just a few months later, he was at number 1, and he was at number 1 for the rest of 1984, 24 weeks. He was like, see you later, MJ. I have a lot of respect for that. For somebody at a cultural moment that is unlike anything the world has seen, maybe twice before ever, Elvis and the Beatles. And for somebody to come and compete, and I would argue, and this is why I think what Prince did was truly outrageous, truly incredible, because 1984 was the most competitive year in the history of music. And I'll argue that till the cows come home. Because in 1984, not only did you have Michael Jackson Thriller, you had Police Synchronicity, and you had Def Leppard Pyromania, that was come out the year before, and were just dominating the competition. You also had Tina Turner's huge comeback. You have Bruce Springsteen, Born in the USA, which was released in the summer. You had Duran Duran, who was really the second coming of the Beatles, at least from the British invasion standpoint. In 1984, it was the most competitive year in music history. And Prince came out and just leveled everybody. Nobody could compete. And so I just have a lot of respect for that. But going back, my choice would be, though, if I had to decide on this poll, my choice would be the Beatles. And here's why. With Michael Jackson, just a close second. I mean, all 3 of the big 3 that won out in the poll from your vote, they all have arguments, strong arguments, right? You have Elvis. Elvis was the first ever. Without Elvis, would there have been a Beatles? Would there have been a Michael Jackson? He was the first to marry it all together. And, people can argue about Chuck Berry and that Elvis stole everybody's thunder. But the truth of the matter is Elvis Presley was phenomenal. One of the greatest voices ever. He was beautiful. As I talk to people who were inspired by Elvis, they just say he was like a god. You looked at him and he was just like everything was perfect about him. And so we can get into the argument later about rock and roll. Shane Ramsey, thank you very much. Don't forget Bryan Adams released Reckless in summer of '69 and '84. That's true. I'm not, again, just helping this argument of that '84 was absolutely the best. And I'm Van Halen 1984. I'm leaving a lot of people out. When I get going, sometimes my mind forgets about these other huge acts, but you're right. There's Van Halen, there was Bryan Adams, there was we could go on. Madonna came out at the end of '84. So just such a huge year. But my point is that you have strong arguments for all three, and then we'll end on this. But Prince, Michael Jackson, Elvis was the first. The Beatles in '64, though, and then Michael Jackson, you could argue that was a much bigger world. The media was, you started to have the 24-hour news cycle and all that kind of thing. But I would argue, my argument for Michael Jackson is that if you were to go to anywhere in '84, '85, Zimbabwe, Antarctica, everybody knew who Michael Jackson was. I don't know if you could say that for the first two, maybe after a few years. And maybe it's because the world was bigger and much more was available. But that's my argument for Michael Jackson. I just said he was everywhere. 8 Grammy Awards, 7 top 10 hits, the biggest selling album ever, 110 million copies. But this is what I'll end on. My argument and why I would choose the Beatles is because I've done now almost 600 interviews with artists ranging from the 50s till now. And I always ask the question to start at every interview with, what was the moment that kicked open the door to your mind and made you want to pursue music? Which, by the way, crap, my thing's about to die. Oh, I gotta plug in here. Sorry, guys. Didn't plan for this. Didn't think I was going to go this long. Let me just plug this in really fast. Bear with me for a second. Okay. Sorry about that. Plugged in. Okay. So I'll end on this. The Beatles, of all the people that I've asked, what was the moment that kicked open the door to your mind and made you want to pursue music? 85% of people answer the Beatles. Whether it's REO Speedwagon, whether it's Jane's Addiction, it doesn't matter who I'm talking to. It's the Beatles. You think about that for a second. When the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan, the very next day, 1,000 bands, hundreds of thousands, probably tens of thousands of bands started. They thought, I can do that too. I want to be just like them. Heart. It doesn't matter if it was male or female or whoever it was. They saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. It blew up the world. That was it. Without the Beatles, I'm not sure what event would have started something that huge. My last argument on the Beatles is this. Go listen to With the Beatles, or go listen to She Loves You, Yeah, Yeah, Yeah. Go listen to I Want to Hold Your Hand. Great pop songs. More pop. Listen to Rubber Soul, Norwegian Wood, and realize that barely 2 years, not even 2 years, went by from those two recordings. I've said it many times. I'll say it again. That was like going from the caveman days, the prehistoric days, to the Industrial Revolution overnight. That's how incredible the Beatles were. So to me, I would take the Beatles in '64 and say that they were the greatest ever. So that's my argument for that. Yeah, somebody just wrote Beatles are boring. I was going to end, but I'm going to take that. Whenever somebody says the Beatles are underrated, I'm sorry, I don't know if I could be your friend. How could you ever call the Beatles underrated? They did things that nobody's ever done and nobody will ever do again. So I think that's a tired argument that people use. That is just a frustrating argument. The Beatles are the greatest ever. They just are. It doesn't matter if you're a fan or not. You can certainly appreciate what they did. I mean, Sgt. Pepper's. You look at every album they did was like this huge leap in everything, in experimentation, in invention. It set the bar that later David Bowie and Pink Floyd and Zeppelin and all these bands that followed would follow that blueprint that they started. And so anyway, that's a topic for another day, but I appreciate you all coming into the live stream. Thank you so much for those who support us on Super Chat. Thank you for all of your support out there. We just passed 200,000 subscribers a couple weeks ago. Could not have done it without you. I love this community. That's what this is for. This is a place where we can all come together and unify around the great unifier, the great equalizer, music. And I hope that we will shut off the news and stop listening to all this negativity out there and come together and just let music envelop our souls. And I promise you, in this community, that's what we're all about. We're going to keep doing it. We're going to have more interviews, more opportunities. If you want to see more of our stuff, check us out on Patreon. We have a big schedule for 2021. We have a lot of great plans. We're going to keep bringing the videos to you. Please let us know in the comments below what else you would like to see. Who should we interview? What songs, what albums, what eras should we cover? We're going to keep doing it. We're going to keep going forward. So I want to leave you with one last thing, a lyric that is a mantra that I live by. And I've actually got an interview about this song, and I'll release it down the road. But let's see. I'm on the spot here, so I'm trying to remember the lyric. Let's see. I want to make sure I get the lyric right. So let me just. I'm really weird about lyrics. Unless I'm like singing the song, I have a hard time remembering it just off the top of my head. And let's see. Bear with me for just a second. Okay, here we go. I think I remember now. It's from a song called Lovers in a Dangerous Time by Bruce Cockburn. And the great Bruce Cockburn. I've interviewed him, and we'll do a story song behind this. But nothing worth having comes without some kind of fight. You got to kick at the darkness until it bleeds daylight. I leave that with you. Just don't give up. Keep going out there. Keep fighting, doing your thing. Kick at the darkness until it bleeds daylight. Until next time, everybody, 3 chords in the truth, my friends. See you later. Stay safe out there, and we'll catch you in the comments. Thank you so much.